mute button, sorry. She showed us how our ultimate purpose is not a good death, but a good life all the way to the end. She showed me and us what makes life worth living. So if we could just take a moment to whatever connections you had with Pat, remember our sage, Pat Adson. So it's a pleasure to see so many familiar faces and some that I don't know, but our guest today is Richard Leider. And Richard is on the St. Croix Valley today in the Africa room of his home. And Richard is no stranger to the Hudson Institute. And in fact, I owe my presence at Hudson and as in large measure to Richard Leider. If everyone would.
Bill, you're muted.
But anyway, I guess with the host. Okay, can you hear me? So yeah. Richard's book that we're focusing on today is The Power of Purpose, 3rd edition. We're also going to be talking about a forthcoming book of Richard's called What Do You Want to Be When You Grow Old? We're going to be talking about purpose, and Richard has for 4 decades been delving into the topic of purpose. He's keynoted at several Hudson annual seminars. And as I say, he's thoroughly been immersed in purpose work. He was recently named a public leadership fellow at the University of Notre Dame, along with Pete Buttigieg, who's just down the hallway there at Notre Dame, I believe. Richard has been named as one of the foremost coaches in the country and has an illustrious client list. He's been a mentor and sage to many of us on this call and throughout the Hudson community, and was a close confidant of Frederick in the early days of Hudson. He's also been a longtime advisor and consultant to the AARP board in Washington, D.C. And we're very excited to start our call today. So Richard, 4 decades of work, and later on we're going to be posting on a screen share your distillation of 40 years in 1 page. But tell us, if you would, what's the relevance of purpose in 2020?
Well, thank you, Bill, and good morning or good afternoon, wherever people are. I've been, as I said, kind of pioneering the purpose movement now for way over 4 decades. And I think it's more relevant or as relevant as ever. And basically it's this: purpose is not a luxury. Purpose is fundamental. And the science is there. Why did I need to do a 3rd edition of The Power of Purpose? Well, I did a PBS special that same year. And with PBS, it was called The Power of Purpose. It was shown in over 400 cities across the country. And you have to have a renewed piece of work or book that comes out at that time. So I rewrote or edited The Power of Purpose book. And increasingly what I had done, compliments of PBS, was to go to the neuroscience labs around the country. Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, others were already clients of mine. But here I was sitting with neuroscientists who were telling me that purpose and the brain are important partners, and that purpose is actually fundamental to health, healing, happiness, and ultimately longevity. People who have a reason to get up in the morning tend to live 7 to 10 years longer. So its relevance, obviously, during a pandemic, we need to push the pause button. During a pandemic, people go higher and they go deeper. And when they go higher, they step back and look at what's going on out there. And when they go deeper, they go within to say what's going on in here. And when they go within, they start to look at, well, what really matters? And what matters, and so many people revisiting their why they get up in the morning, why they do the work they do, why they live the life they live. So I think it's completely relevant today, Bill. It's in the zeitgeist.
Thank you, Richard. We're going to be taking questions in the chat. So I just want to encourage you to post your questions as we have our call today. The call is also being recorded. And one thing I wanted to point out is a tool that Richard has developed at the Adventure Group called calling cards. And many of you may be familiar with this tool. But Richard, you based those calling cards on the work of John Holland for career exploration and so on. Could you tell us a little bit about calling cards as a tool and how you've used those with clients and how the HI folks on this call could use that tool?
Well, let me start out by sharing a maybe amusing story, but a true story. Way back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, I was the number 2 person in HR, then called personnel, at what is now US Bank, was First Bank at the time. But I had a side hustle. And the side hustle was today it's called a side hustle or a avocation or a gig in the gig economy. And mine was called Lunch Hour Limited. Coach, if you bought me lunch, I would coach you because I was trained as a counselor and yet I was doing HR work, but I missed the counseling. So I did Lunch Hour Limited. I had a waiting list a mile long for a Lunch Hour Limited. It was a very good side hustle. And I had an 80% success ratio, Bill. 80% of the people that I coached quit. Now, they didn't actually leave. They went back and reinvented their job or moved somewhere in the organization. But what they were looking for was kind of like I would call it a midlife guidance counselor. For many people, their work chose them. They didn't choose it. And they got to a point where they were looking at kind of what they were doing and wondering, how can I do something I love to do? So I left the bank after a period of time. I got and I started to create what's now called InVenture, the Purpose Company, and tools to help people. And calling cards was one of those tools. One of the people who I worked very closely with at the time, a colleague of John Holland's, was Richard Bowles. I met Richard Bowles before What Color Is Your Parachute came out. And I started to look at the fact that there wasn't a lot of real common sense tools out there for people. We're talking about the mid 70s. And so I created calling cards way back then in one form, and it's morphed over time. And I did the research on it. And the basic formula of calling cards is this: gifts plus passions plus values equals calling. Calling's another word for purpose. So are you using your gifts on things you feel passionate about in environments where you have a voice that fit your values? That's what calling cards is all about. There are other tools out there, StrengthsFinder, many other kinds of tools, but this one is really intuitive. And I find that I get messages all over the world where people use calling cards with their family, in their teams, in coaching, and things like that. So the distinction here is, to finish that, Bill, is some people have a job, it pays the bills. Some people have a career, they're moving up the career ladder and maybe paying the bills as well. And some people have a calling, and a calling is something that fits that formula in certain ways. Those people, many of them want to get up in the morning. They want to go use their most enjoyed gifts on things they feel passionate or purposeful about, and in environments that fit. And I think every coach, self as coach, I think every coach ought to do this to make sure they are, as they're coaching others, are clear about their own gifts, passions, and values, and maybe renew that every so often.
Thank you, Richard. One of the things you have mentioned over the years is your formula for the good life. And I've heard a lot poorer formulae than yours. Could you share how clarity of purpose contributes in your formula for a good life?
Well, this is my 11th book coming out. 6 of my books I've co-authored with a philosophy professor in Seattle named David Shapiro. And David and I co-wrote Repacking Your Bags, which has sold over 1 million copies in 20 languages. And the subtitle is Repacking Your Bags, Lighten Your Load for the Good Life. When we wrote that book, we went back, particularly he went back into the research from Aristotle and Plato forward. The good life's been around for a long, long time. And we looked at what constitutes the good life in the modern world today. And, Aristotle said it was about virtues and things like this. And we came up with these 4 elements: place, people, right work, and purpose. So are you living in the place you love, with the people you love, doing the work you love, on purpose, with an aim, a direction to life? So the work part of it is what we just talked about, the formula, the gifts, passions, and values. But many people at different times in their life, the good life, some piece is missing. In seminars that I've done around the globe, oftentimes it's people or place. And so the good life has been around. I have a colleague who, when you call him on his answering machine, the answering machine says this: at the sound of the tone, please leave your answer to life's 2 eternal questions. Who are you and what do you want? And which I think is pretty darn good, because who we are and what we want oftentimes is 2 things. We want to belong and we want to matter. And the good life is about belonging and mattering in our place, with the people, with the right work and purpose. And it can change over time. The new book that's coming out, it's Who Do You Want to Be When You Grow Old? The Path of Purposeful Aging. And here we look at the good life in the later stages of life, which it changes for many people.
Great. Thank you, Richard. We have a question in the chat from Robbie Swinnon, who poses the question: when a client wants to work on defining his or her purpose, based on your life's work, what are the initial steps they should take?
Calling cards is the initial step that I work with 100% of the time with people. I think calling and purpose are the same. Calling for me is the vocational language for purpose. But to know your why do you get up in the morning? Purpose is a verb. It's not just something that you name. It's an action in the world. It's compassion is the soul of purpose. And so getting up and using your most enjoyed gifts, you need to be self-aware on things you feel passionate or curious about in an environment that fits who you are. That's the secret sauce of ultimately naming your calling. And Robbie, I'll give you a shorthand, the universal default purpose that I say. If people say, oh, this is too hard, I don't have the time, I call this the got a minute school of coaching, because people say, Richard, you got a minute? Can you tell me what I should do with the rest of my life? I'll say, well, take out a Post-it and write this down. Grow and give. That's the universal purpose worldwide. If you get up and you grow and give, let's just say the morning practice is you get up and you put a little Post-it on your mirror. It looks like this. Grow and give. That's my Post-it. And you put it on your mirror. In the morning, you say, how am I going to grow and give today? Why grow? Because then you have something to give. And you continually to be self as human, self as coach, self as parent, self as teacher, whatever. And give. At the end of the day, you look at your Post-it again, and you say to yourself, you do a personal accountability check and say, how did I grow and give today? At the end of 1 week, people will have a felt sense of what purpose is all about. Not an abstract sense, but a felt sense that purpose is something that I can do. It's simple. There are 1,441 purpose moments in a day. Now write that down and think about that. If you take sleep out of it, then it'll be less than that. But there's 141 moments in a 24-hour day. Chances to make a difference in one person's life. My purpose is to help others unlock, not discover out there, unlock in here the power of purpose. And my felt sense is that every day I do this same exercise I just shared with you. I ask myself, how am I going to grow and give today? And at the end of the day, did I grow and give? And so it's setting an intention in the morning, and then it's delivering on that intention in a purpose moment. It could be just a kind word, a crust of bread, like my teacher, Viktor Frankl, who I spent a week with in the 60s, changed my life forever about the choice that purpose represents. Purpose is always a choice. It's a choice to get up with an intention to make a difference in somebody else's life.
Thank you. So related to this, we'll have a question in a moment about creativity and coaching and how we foster that. But Eric Erickson, as he talked about the 8 stages of growth and identity, when he came to the choice of generativity and stagnation related to your purpose Post-it note, and Pat Adson, I think, was a wonderful role model in this in terms of lifelong learning and engagement. But could you tell us about your notion of the golden hour during one's day?
Well, I think what it is no matter how aware we are of the preciousness of time, with technology and with everything going on, a lot of people today suffering from hurry sickness, always going somewhere, never being anywhere. And so we talk a lot about presence. But one of the things that I feel is critical is to make appointments with ourselves. If you were to call my office first thing in the morning, you would hear either a recording or you would hear somebody say, he has an appointment, can he call or talk to you later? But the appointment is with myself. And that I call that appointment with myself golden hour. Golden hour is no technology, push the pause button on technology, no internet, no computer. Reading, it's an hour of contemplative practice. Reading, writing, reflecting, and thinking about, if I get paid to think, to write, and to coach others, it's kind of back to self as coach. I've got to, you can't give away what you don't own. If you're asking others to reflect, how do you reflect? And that's the way I reflect. One of the ways I reflect of several is to have golden hour first thing every morning.
Thank you. We have a question from Pat Pattison, who specializes in coaching creatives in Hollywood. And Pat asked, how do you see creativity helping with finding purpose?
Well, there's a lot of ways into the purpose this discussion. So when you talk about creativity, it's kind of a broad umbrella. But I think the key is to be authentic, to be authentically creative. And that means to use your gifts on things you're curious about. I was backstage a while back with, before going out to give a talk, with the founder of TED, TED Talks. And his name is Richard Saul Warman, the founder of TED. Sold it a long time ago to Chris Anderson. We're backstage. He's in his 80s. He calls me young man, and I'm in my 70s. And he said, what are you going to talk about? And I said, purpose. And he kind of shrugged it off. And I said, well, Richard, what are you going to talk about? And he said, curiosity. Don't you think that curiosity is the kind of the soul of, or, kind of the catalyst for purpose? And I said, absolutely. If you're not curious about yourself and about another person or about the world, you're probably not going to be living purposefully. So curiosity and compassion and courage are the 3 kind of elixirs that help launch purpose. What are you curious about that you want to do something about, perhaps, or study or master? What are you courageous about? What are you willing to step into and do something about? And compassion. Compassion is really the soul of purpose. As I said, it's a verb. And so creativity comes from using your gifts, I believe, that are unique to you. Now, here's the thing, if I can just take this one step further, Pat, and that is that what are gifts? Well, gifts have 4 characteristics that I've learned. Those calling cards have 4 characteristics on each card. Number 1, it's something you love to do. Number 2, others observe you loving to do it. You may not be world class at it even. You may not have it. And the third thing, this is the big one. So love to do it, others observe you loving to do it and doing it effortlessly. And the third thing is can't recall learning it. And so when I developed calling cards, I went back and interviewed parents, teachers, siblings, etc., to see whether this Bill Lindbergh guy, did he have these gifts when he was young? And I found out in almost 100% of the cases, the answer was yes. And in an audience, I'll often say, raise your hand if you have siblings. Not everybody has them, but many have them. And I said, are your siblings' gifts the same as yours? And there's almost a loud laugh in the room. And they say, no, 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 my siblings are completely different than me. One's a musician, one's an artist, one's an analytical, and I said, well, when did you start to notice? Well, real early in life. And so these gifts in the service of curiosity, et cetera, are in TED Talks, millions, billions of people watching TED Talks because they're curious. And then that leads to creativity.
Thank you. That brings to mind, and I think this was in the Life Launch book, early edition, and continues to be, the Abraham Maslow quotation about a painter must paint, a musician must make music, a poet must write poetry if he or she is to be totally at peace with himself or herself. I once heard you describe the difference we're turning now briefly to a marketing question that's come in for a new independent coach who wants to help clients find their purpose. Her question is about how does one market themselves? And I know in the early days of Hudson, marketing and pragmatic logistics of the street smarts on marketing weren't as endemic as they are now to the curriculum at HI. But I remembered, I think it was at the Marconi Center on Tomales Bay, that I heard you describe the difference between somebody begging for alms as, by the side of the road, and how comparable that pose was to offering your gift. And I've taken that because a lot of people are skittish, marketing, sales, I got to sell myself, what's this? But could you explain, if you remember that metaphor, about the distinction between begging for business versus confidently offering your gift to the world?
I'll answer that, but first, can I just go back to Maslow for a minute? All the people on this call and your clients have had fortuitous encounters with people, that is, with people who changed your point of view, changed your life trajectory, made a difference. I had 2 of those. I've had many of those actually. Richard Bowles, I mentioned earlier, What Color Is Your Parachute? But I spent a week with Viktor Frankl, who I'd studied in graduate school in San Diego back in the 60s. And for those who don't know, Man's Search for Meaning to me is a must read, in addition to my own books, of course. Just kidding. But Man's Search for Meaning is the book that Frankl wrote after getting out of 3 Nazi concentration camps. And he said this, you could hear a pin drop every day that he spoke in San Diego when I was there. But he said, the last of the human freedoms is choice. It's to choose what you want your life to be about, regardless of the adversities, the situation you're in. He was in a concentration camp and he said, I could get up and give others a kind word, a crust of bread, a slurp of soup, hug, a hope for the future. I had a choice even in the most adverse situations. So it's about that. The other thing, Maslow gets misquoted often. I met Maslow just the year before he died, 1969, I think it was 68 or 69. And he and Frankl had an adversarial relationship, at the end of which they came full court, because what Maslow said is the top of the Maslow pyramid is actually not self-actualization, it's self-transcendence. Now, most of you probably know that, but self-transcendence is really purpose. Purpose is always about making a difference outside of yourself. It's about making your offer, as you're saying, Bill, outside of yourself. And so after he died, his wife came out with a book, The Farther Reaches of Human Nature, which took the Maslow pyramid that next step into self-transcendence, which a lot of people don't realize. But what I'd like to say is that on marketing, the starting point is to do your homework. Here I'm holding up something called an incomplete manifesto for purpose. And maybe, Danielle, we can show this very quickly on the screen. But 5 decades of work, I summarized what I believe. Here it is. I call it an incomplete manifesto for purpose because I'm still a learner. The future belongs to the learners, not the knowers. And here I have 10 points. You can go to my website, richardleider.com. Everything on my website is free. But the first thing you'll see is a download of my belief system, what I stand for. And so many people who talk about purpose or talk about coaching, when I ask them what they stand for, they're kind of vague, and a lot of cliches, a lot of aphorisms. I think the starting point to marketing is being crystal clear about what you stand for. So the question is not, what is my manifesto? You know, every movement needs a manifesto. So I've been a pioneer in the purpose movement, and therefore I created a manifesto for that movement. The back of that has my top 10 questions that I ask people about unlocking the power of purpose. So you can take that off now, but that's free download for when you want it. So the starting point to marketing is not marketing. The starting point is be clear about what you stand for, and then to narrow your niche about what part of coaching you are claiming mastery in. You can broaden your offer. You know, I have done purpose work from boardroom to bush, from Africa, like the room I'm in here with all these African artifacts, where I've been leading walking safaris for the last 35 years, to boardrooms around the world. What got me there was my alleged mastery in something that I had studied, and taken a deep dive into and really knew supposedly a lot about, and that was the power of purpose. From that, I was able to broaden my offer and to not even to have a marketing niche in certain ways. So I'm not a big fan of networking unless it's total reciprocity. A lot of talk about networking. I think networking is way overdone. It's one way. What can you do for me? As the purpose thing, as we talk about purpose, it's all about reciprocity in certain ways. And so I do believe that narrowing your niche on your stand is the starting point.
Thank you, Richard. You mentioned, what we stand for. We're, at least in the US, we're in the throes of the final 2 weeks of a significant election. Without necessarily being,
I knew this had to come up somehow.
Well, it does on everybody's mind.
Yeah, of course.
In a nonpartisan way, I'll pose the question: how does clarity of purpose help a person retain their equanimity in the final 2 weeks of an election year?
Oh boy. Well, I'll tell you the key ingredient in coaching to me is the key ingredient in your question. And the starting point is centering. Centering is a bodily function as well as a cognitive function. So centering is this. I call it the 2-minute practice. Centering means pause, take 3 deep breaths, and be intentional about what you're going to do in the next moment. We're constantly grabbed and pulled off center by news, by ads, by major problems. And I live in Minneapolis, and think of all the things that have happened in Minneapolis with the George Floyd work and with everything, work meaning problem, murder, and et cetera. And the second thing is answering 3 questions. I just talked a little bit about it, but what do you stand for? what won't you stand for, and who do you stand with? I think when you're centering and then asking yourself, where's my core? What's my center? What do I stand for? What won't I stand for? Who do I stand with? That's a starting point. And the other thing that, going back to Viktor Frankl for a moment, Viktor Frankl actually wrote a book, just came out for the first time last year in English. He wrote it in the 9 months after the concentration camp, before he came out with Man's Search for Meaning. Most people don't know this. And I've studied Frankl now and consider him a mentor for many, many years. But the book is called Say Yes to Life in Spite of Everything. Say Yes to Life in Spite of Everything. It's a brilliant book. It just came out, as I said, in English last year. But the other thing, Bill, is to do an attitude check. Say yes to life in spite of what's going on. That we can say, well, surely we'll get through this. Who knows how long this pandemic will, who knows what will happen after the election, all of that. But we need to hold the center. As coaches, as human beings, we need to have good centering practices and demonstrate those for our clients and our families.
Thank you, Richard. This is one of the most difficult things in terms of the self as coach process that I've experienced, is trying to stay grounded and centered and keep the sovereignty within myself as I navigate the world.
Yep.
I think I'd like us to shift. There are questions in the chat that I'm going to be looking at and curating, but one that perhaps bridges us into your new and forthcoming book is, and perhaps, Danielle, we could have the 2 slides momentarily in the screen share. But the question is, for your newest book, what is front and center for you about getting older?
Well, I've been a student of aging along with purpose for a long, long time. And aging got old. The longevity revolution, now there's more people over 65 than under 5. And so one of the point, I always start with, one of my co-authors, Alan Weber. And Alan and I co-wrote the book Life Reimagined, that was co-published with AARP and our publisher. And and Alan, by the way, took to heart reimagining life. And he is now the mayor of Santa Fe, New Mexico. So talk about a reimagined life. But when we wrote Life Reimagined, we saw that the linear life is dead. The linear life was get an education, go to work, retire. And as people have added 30 years, 3 decades to their lives, the demographic shift is in favor of aging. And so here's the point that we came to in Life Reimagined, and that we now, David Shapiro, my co-author on this new book, and I came to is this: the research and science is this: how we feel about aging affects how we age. Now think about that. It seems like kind of a benign statement, but how we actually feel about aging affects how we age. So this book is about how to age better and how to feel about aging. And it's about, the subtitle is The Path of Purposeful Aging. We talk about the path and practices of positive and purposeful aging. There's 2 big times we grow up in life. One is from adolescence to adulthood. And the second time we grow up is from adulthood to elderhood. And there's a lot written about the shift from adolescence to adulthood, not a lot about adulthood to elderhood. So we did a radical rethink that aging is not a disease, it's a design problem. It's the way we think about it. Ageism is one of the isms that's really alive and well. And so this book has been a fun book to write. It's a real conversation. And the first part of the book, just to finish, can we see that first slide?
Danielle?
the first slide is this. You probably remember, you go back and say, well, what did I want to be when I grew up? And many people, and how did that turn out for you? Many people are still answering that question today. What did I want to be when I grew up? And many times we didn't get much help. We just kind of went about growing up, and we call that the default life. Many people today suffering from burnout and unhappiness and midlife malaise because they never actually chose what they wanted to do with their life, their good life or their career life. So what did I want to be when I grew up is all about the what. So the question that we really dug into was, we took that to the next slide, and that was who, not what, who do I want to be when I grow old? The path of purposeful aging. So a lot of people are living in the second half of life, or in elderhood, we call it, looking in the rearview mirror, living the way their parents did or their grandparents did. Well, there's a whole lot we knew about the windshield, about looking forward and reimagining our lives. And a lot of people going through not a midlife crisis, but a later life crisis. And we talk about that and many, many stories in the book from people who have endorsed the book, like Parker Palmer. And the story of, many of you are probably fans of Parker Palmer, and his most recent book is On the Brink of Everything, which is basically on the brink of dying. I've known Parker for a long time. We have a beautiful whole chapter in the book about Parker and aging, and who he wants to be and what his advice is, and other people that are in the book as well. So that's what the book's about, and it'll be out in spring. And David and I both are pretty darn excited. We think this may be our best book. It's the book we had the most fun writing. He's 63, I'm 76, and we've been writing now 6 books together, 3 bestsellers. And this book is now in the can at the publisher, ready to go to press as soon as we can get it out there.
And Barrett Kaler, I believe, is the publisher. Is that?
Yeah, Barrett Kohler is the publisher, and Penguin is the distributor. And this is their lead book for 2020. You know, it used to be that aging didn't sell. Well, Parker Palmer's book was instantly went on the New York Times bestseller list, and has been off and on in many, many books about aging. When you look at the demographics and we think this book will, it's not just about, we think it'll help a lot of people to kind of radically rethink that, that this is not a disease, but a design problem, and here are the choices they have in the next phase of their life. And coaches, I believe, we could go into this for a whole session here. A lot of coaches, I think, need to revisit their own concept of ageism. And let me just share 3 words or 3 concepts that I hope coaches don't use. The first is the word still. Still. Oh, Richard, you're still writing. Richard, you're still coaching. Richard, you're still trekking in Africa. Well, who decided what still the rules were for still? And Bill Lindbergh, you're still of counsel. Oh, shouldn't you have retired by now? Well, delete still from your language. The next one is for your age. People say, oh, Richard, you look good for your age. You look great for your age. And no matter what age they are, I say, well, you look great too, because who gets to decide what, aging is supposed to look like? It's not about anti-aging, it's about pro-aging. And the third one is senior moment. We all have our memory lapses and senior moments, but people of all ages have their moments. We want to substitute that with purpose moments instead. Anyway, it's a short book, 200 pages, 5x7 hardcover, beautifully designed. I hope it'll be in the hands of many coaches.
Well, I suspect that many people on this call are getting their wish list for the spring ready now. But before this call, we spoke a little bit about Robin DiAngelo's work on racism and so on and white fragility. And one of her assertions is that we're all racist, and part of that is informed by the culture we live, work, and breathe in. If you could just say a little bit more about that. You've talked about it in terms of ageism and how subtle sometimes those forces are, but anything more to add about that as we, Frederick would always talk about how you had to be a certain age, kind of a threshold age to have enough life experience to be an effective coach. But, we're now pushing the upper boundaries. And again, Pat Adson was a tremendous quintessential example of that. But what are, again, some of the subtle things that you've experienced? You've mentioned a few that we as coaches, whether we're dealing with clients to avoid pitfalls or just be aware of in our own socialized points of view.
You can take the slide off now, Danielle. Thank you. Yeah, I think, well, first of all, change or transition, change happens, transition's a choice, as we know. And it's often the crucibles in life. I just wrote a piece, which is a blog on my website called Life in Limbo. And many times we make choices, we're pushed by pain or we're pulled by possibility. And we make choices during the crucibles of life, during those times when, as I said earlier, life throws us a curveball, a triggering event, which leads us into limbo, that period of uncertainty. It's like being between two trapezes where we're letting go of one and not quite ready to grab the other, or we're hanging there, hanging on to both before making that move. And so in many ways, we're living in a big crucible now called a pandemic. And so we're learning a lot about ourselves, I think, as we do as coaches and as human beings and as parents or partners or spouses, about how we are handling these crucibles. One of the things I find very interesting, Bill, contextually about your question is this, that the book Passages, remember Passages? Talk about life in limbo. Passages came out 44 years ago to the day. 44 years ago, 1976, I think. And it redefined our lives for decades. It was on the New York Times bestseller list. The Library of Congress and the Book of the Month Club claim that Passages at its time, for those decades that it was out there, was one of the books that helped define life in America. I think we're in that kind of zeitgeist moment now, this passage into this new, what some people call the new normal. It isn't going to be a new normal. It's going to be a new abnormal. And we're going to have to deal with it in all kinds of ways. And so that's why I'm writing about these things and thinking about these things, like most of the people I think on this call. What are the new life skills for the 21st century? What is it we need to learn from this life in limbo that we're in now? And Schopenhauer, a German philosopher, said, every new idea goes through 3 steps. The first step is ridicule. People say to me, oh, Richard, you hit this purpose thing just right with aging and with all the changes in life. I said, yeah, 40, 50 years later. And second step is violent opposition. People push back on new skills or new ideas. Purpose was not always popular. It is now. Mayo Clinic, I write about, and Mayo Clinic has a whole statement about purpose and well-being, purpose and health. Places like that have now embraced purpose as fundamental to health, healing, happiness, and longevity. And the third step, so there's ridicule, opposition, and then self-evident. I think it's self-evident now that we're going to have new life skills for the 21st century. So as coaches, what are the life skills that you're teaching and that you're bringing out in others for the 21st century? One of those life skills is, I believe, the power of purpose. It's to get up in the morning and have a choice to make about what your intention is, what your aim is. Purpose is not a goal. Let me repeat, purpose is not a goal. It's not a role. Purpose is an aim. It's the answer to the question, why get up in the morning? And so I'll stop there. But I think we're talking now, and we're all in the learning mode about what are the new life skills that for aging as well as post-pandemic.
Richard, for many of us on this call, we have had a career of accumulating things, myself included, and I take great pride after reading Repacking Your Bags again a while ago, of moving from a 10-foot by 10-foot external storage locker to a 5-foot by 10-foot storage locker. So I'm slowly practicing the art of Swedish death cleaning. But as you think about purpose and, clarifying, making room for what's new in life skills in the 21st century, what do we have to sort of let go of in the repacking our bags front? And any thoughts about how that can help us in that process?
Well, I think the starting point is what our intention is for the good life. Let's go back to that for a moment. When I did the Good Life PBS special, one of the things I asked people to do was to go home and clean out a drawer or a closet, but start with a drawer. Once you answered the question, what is a good life? Then in that drawer, 3 boxes in front of you, things you're going to keep that will be essential to the good life, the way you've defined it. The no box, things that are absolutely not essential to the next phase. And then can't decide, kind of the question mark in the middle. I had people, Bill, even to this day, and this was several years ago that the PBS special came out, who started with a drawer, moved to a closet, and started with the tangible things, like the stuff. Then they went to their calendar and started to look at time that they were spending. Then they went to relationships and they started to look at what do they need to unpack in terms of not only their stuff, but their time, the way they're spending their time, and their relationships. And I have people who said, I started with a drawer, I went to a closet, I went to a calendar and relationships, and I ended up moving. I sold my house because I realized that it was time, but I just was kind of stuck in between the trapezes, and I needed to let go of one and move to the other. And the way that I did that was by a clear or a clearer definition of the good life.
Thank you. Well, one other thing, and I'll just remind people that we have the chat. One of the chat entries made a plug for the the Gallup Strengths Finder. So related to calling cards and so on, I just want to highlight that the Strength Finder.
It's excellent. I know the Strengths Finder. I've used almost all the tools that I think most people have used. But there's something intuitive about calling cards. When you choose it yourself and you pick up a card and you tell a story about it, it's not someone else assessing you or getting you a list. It's actually owning something that has been with you since birth. So there's some distinctions in it that are helpful.
Good. Well, one other thing, and it wouldn't be a call with Richard Leider we're not in this alone if we're fortunate, and we have the community of HI coaches here. But one of your signature contributions that I've appreciated is the notion of the sounding board. And wherever we are on this continuum of aging and working or unlearning and learning, tell us a little bit about, and at this point in your life and just over time, the value of a sounding board for you and what you've observed in sounding board contributions for people.
Yeah. Well, a sounding board is like a kitchen cabinet or the people you sit around the fire or the table, kitchen table with. And there's several people that there's 2 things that are kind of mantras for me in my coaching and in my life and in my work. These are everyone is an experiment of one. They're unique. And number two, isolation is fatal. So experiment of one is you're unique. And secondly, don't go it alone. Isolation is fatal. And particularly with aging, isolation, very bad thing. So on the sounding board, there's 4 characteristics, 4 people that I suggest that you consider. And hopefully as a coach, you're on the client's sounding board. But when I was coaching CEOs and others, I'm doing a lot more writing and speaking these days and less coaching. But I wouldn't coach someone, no matter how famous they were or how powerful or whatever they were, if they didn't have a sounding board. That's how important I thought it was, because I didn't want them to be dependent on me and just dependent on the people right closest to them. So the sounding board 4 people are: first, who's your committed listener? Who's the person who listens to you without fixing you, who practices care versus cure, who practices being interested rather than being interesting? Well, here's what I would do if I were you, type of thing. So we need a committed listener beyond a coach. A coach is a committed listener by profession, but who else in your trajectory? Secondly, who is your wise elder? Who's the person that maybe is 10 years ahead of you? Pat Adson, I would say, would be on my sounding board. That's why I wrote what I wrote. Even though I didn't talk with Pat all the time, I did endorse her book, but I consider her a wise elder, somebody who modeled how I wanted to be, not exactly, but characteristics I wanted to have as I aged like she did. Third, who is your wise younger? Maybe 10 years younger or more, who asks you questions that you might not ask, not just helping you fix your technology, but actually ask you why questions, and why are you doing this, and why are you not doing that, and what do you stand for, and what don't you stand for, and things like that. Where were you during this pandemic? Where were you during global climate change? Things like that. And the fourth thing is, who is your purpose partner? Who's the person who you can really talk with and they'll hold you accountable for naming your purpose and living purposefully? And so those 4, committed listener for sure is, I believe, are essential as we move forward. As I said, isolation is fatal. There's a study I'm blanking on out of the University of Chicago that's been going on for decades. And over time, they measure who you talk to about what really matters in your life, not professionals like doctors or coaches, et cetera. And there's a high percentage of people across the board who don't even have one person today that they talk to about what really matters. This is a health and a longevity issue for people, not just a nice to do.
Thank you very much. I just want to remind people that we'll have a recording posted to the HI website, the She Coaches part of that. And I also want to throw in, I've been involved in the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at the University of Minnesota. And their motto is that curiosity never retires. And Richard, you've been a wonderful sage and mentor for me, not quite 10 years my elder, but 3 or 4, so that qualifies. But I want to thank you so much for being with us today. I guess we have just a minute or two. I've tried to pose questions that showed up in the chat, but if there's somebody with a burning topic or question that hasn't been posed to Richard, if you would just unmute and speak up, we probably have one more question that could be posed. If there's somebody with such a burning question while Richard's still on the Zoom.
If not, I have a burning answer.
Okay. So yeah, so going once, again, just unmute and speak up if you would like.
Well, let me say something, Bill, while someone's thinking about that. And that is, I'm a simpleton. I like simple practices. You're only as good as coaches, we're only as good as our practices and our mindset. And I always say there's 3 M's that are fundamental: money, medicine, and meaning. We need money to survive. Medicine is code for health, but we also need meaning. We all know people who are wealthy and unhappy, and we know people who are not wealthy and are happy. I gave a talk recently at 3M company, and they thought it was so cool that I made up the 3Ms for them, 3M company. But it's fundamental. We need money, we need medicine, health, but we also need meaning. We need a reason to get up in the morning. And I've been a stand for that now for a long, long time. And I believe it's fundamental. And I hope that I put that across during this call. So thank you very much for hosting this and being a great interviewer.
You absolutely have. And for me, 11 years ago on the health front, I was navigating a very precarious health situation.
Yep.
And thankfully, I'm still here, after a stage 4 situation. But one of the things I took away from that is don't procrastinate. So for all of you on this call, we've had a wonderful time being with Richard today. So thank you so much, Richard. Thank you, Danielle, for your technical support behind the scenes. And I wish you all well, and be sure to vote.
Ditto. Thank you, Bill.